A new wave of U.S. airstrikes against Iran marks the restart of open warfare, raising fears of a regional conflict that could escalate into a global crisis. What triggered this sudden shift, and what are the implications for the world? As tensions escalate, the U.S. has announced plans to intensify airstrikes targeting Iranian military and nuclear facilities. This decision comes amid rising concerns over Iran's nuclear ambitions and its ongoing regional destabilization efforts, particularly in Iraq, Syria, and Yemen. The U.S. government perceives these actions as direct threats to both its interests and those of its allies in the Middle East. In response, Iran is likely to ramp up its assaults on oil tankers in the Gulf, U.S. military bases, and possibly even Israeli interests, creating a volatile environment ripe for conflict. Such retaliatory measures could lead to a significant escalation of hostilities, potentially drawing in other regional players. The strategic Strait of Hormuz, through which a substantial portion of the world's oil supply is transported, may face a tighter naval blockade, disrupting global shipping routes and compelling the U.S. to consider emergency oil releases from its strategic reserves to stabilize markets. The ramifications of these developments are far-reaching. The U.S. may attempt to build a coalition among Gulf states to counteract Iran's regional influence, while Iran could activate its extensive network of proxy groups to target U.S. and Israeli assets in retaliation. This scenario raises the stakes for Israel, which may feel compelled to act preemptively if it perceives an imminent threat from Iran's advancing nuclear capabilities. Long-term implications are particularly concerning. If the Strait of Hormuz remains obstructed, global oil prices could soar, potentially triggering an economic downturn worldwide. As the geopolitical landscape shifts, the influence of the EU and China may become increasingly significant, though their capacity to mediate effectively remains uncertain. The nuclear threshold is critical. Should Iran accelerate its nuclear program, it risks provoking a preemptive strike from the U.S. or Israel, leading to a full-scale regional war. In the coming weeks, the focus will be on whether diplomatic channels can de-escalate the situation, or if both nations are indeed on a collision course toward irreversible conflict. The recent escalation in tensions between the U.S. and Iran has been driven by a complex history marked by failed negotiations and rising confrontations. For months, a memorandum of understanding aimed to ease hostilities between the two nations, yet fundamental disagreements about its interpretation hindered any potential for lasting peace. Over the weekend, the situation deteriorated dramatically with a series of attacks in the Middle East that exacerbated tensions and led both countries to assert control over the strategically vital Strait of Hormuz. This waterway is crucial as it facilitates the transport of a significant portion of the world's oil supply. The ceasefire that had provided a temporary reprieve officially ended with President Trump's notification to Congress, signaling a return to hostilities. Diplomatic efforts to broker a ceasefire in Gaza also faltered, resulting in further violence and instability in the region. Iran's retaliatory attacks on oil tankers and U.S. military installations underscore the collapse of the ceasefire and reflect deeper grievances rooted in Iran's nuclear ambitions and U.S. sanctions. Ongoing regional proxy conflicts continue to fuel distrust between the two nations. This history of misunderstandings and military provocations sets a dangerous precedent, making the current conflict more volatile than previous encounters. The implications of this escalation extend beyond immediate military engagement. They threaten global economic stability and raise concerns about energy security, as fluctuations in oil supply can ripple through international markets. As both nations brace for potential escalation, the outlook remains grim. With diplomatic channels strained and both sides unwilling to compromise, the risk of miscalculation looms large. Immediate and concerted international efforts are essential to address the underlying issues and facilitate dialogue. Without proactive engagement, the cycle of retaliation may intensify, leading to a broader conflict in the Middle East. The ongoing conflict between the U.S. and Iran has escalated dramatically, with significant implications that extend far beyond their borders. The Strait of Hormuz, a vital maritime choke point, serves as a conduit for approximately 20% of global oil consumption and 30% of all seaborne oil trade. Any sustained military action or blockade in this region could severely disrupt oil supplies from major producers, including Saudi Arabia, Iraq, and Kuwait. Such disruptions would likely trigger a global energy crisis, impacting economies worldwide. The price of crude oil has already surged, reflecting fears of instability. Shipping and air travel costs are also climbing as the specter of these disruptions looms larger. The situation has deteriorated further with the resumption of Iranian attacks on Persian Gulf states, casting serious doubt on any remaining diplomatic efforts aimed at stabilizing the region. The U.S. and Iran have entered a phase of open warfare, marked by airstrikes exchanged in the Middle East. In this complex landscape, Israel, a key U.S. ally, has intensified its military operations, resulting in civilian casualties, particularly in Gaza. This escalation raises urgent humanitarian concerns and highlights the potential for wider regional instability. The targeting of Iran's nuclear capabilities introduces a critical nuclear risk into the equation. If Iran perceives its existence to be under threat, it may accelerate its nuclear weapons program in a desperate bid for security. This scenario could push the region closer to a catastrophic confrontation, with dire consequences for global peace and security. For the average person, the stakes are alarmingly high. Increased energy prices and potential economic instability could soon ripple through economies worldwide, making this conflict a pressing global concern. As nations grapple with the fallout from rising costs and geopolitical tensions, the interconnectedness of our modern world underscores the urgency of addressing these issues. Looking ahead, the potential for diplomatic solutions appears increasingly tenuous. Many analysts warn that without proactive measures, the situation could spiral further out of control. The international community must work diligently to find a path toward de-escalation, or risk plunging into a broader conflict that could reshape global alliances and economic landscapes for years to come. On July 15, 2026, the U.S. Central Command, known as CENTCOM, announced a significant escalation in military actions against Iran. This marked the end of a months-long ceasefire that had been tenuously maintained since earlier diplomatic efforts aimed at de-escalation. President Donald Trump informed Congress that military operations had resumed against Iranian targets, signaling a decisive shift in U.S. foreign policy. Key developments unfolded rapidly as the U.S. conducted airstrikes on Pickaxe Mountain, a fortified underground facility near Tehran linked to Iran's nuclear ambitions. This specific target had been previously threatened by Trump, indicating a determined U.S. stance against perceived Iranian aggression. In retaliation, Iran launched attacks on 2 oil tankers in the Gulf of Oman and fired upon U.S. military sites in the region, confirming a dangerous descent back into open conflict. This cycle of aggression is reminiscent of past U.S.-Iran tensions, which have historically revolved around nuclear capabilities and regional influence. Moreover, the U.S. reinstated a naval blockade in the Strait of Hormuz, asserting control over this vital waterway after a series of attacks across the region. The strait is crucial for global oil shipments, and any disruption can have immediate repercussions on oil prices worldwide, potentially destabilizing economies reliant on oil imports. Initially, Trump proposed imposing a 20% fee on cargo passing through the strait, a move that drew sharp criticism from allies and economic experts. However, under diplomatic pressure, he later retracted this threat, indicating the complexity of international relations in this volatile context. Iran has responded by threatening to close other export routes that benefit the U.S. and its allies, further escalating tensions. This situation stands apart from previous conflicts due to its immediate impact on global oil supplies and the potential for a broader regional war. Both nations are now openly engaging in military operations, raising fears of a wider confrontation in the Middle East. Looking ahead, the international community is bracing for potential ripple effects that could destabilize the region further. As both sides prepare for continued conflict, the likelihood of negotiations appears increasingly remote, with the potential for a prolonged standoff looming on the horizon. As tensions rise between the U.S. and Iran, how far will both nations go before reaching a point of no return? Share your thoughts in the comments below and subscribe for more in-depth analyses of unfolding global events.